It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Conservative MP Siobhan Bailey, Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jenny Chapman, Leader of the Reclaim Party Laurence Fox and Director of the Left of Centre think tank Class Ellie Mae O'Hagan. Today, ministers are asked this question.
Do you feel powerless to help with the cost of living, sir?
The Bank of England thinks things could get this bad.
I'm afraid the one that I am going to sound, I guess, rather apocalyptic about is food.
After the government delays a ban on junk foods, Jamie Oliver says this.
You've got 36 hours to go back on your U-turn of your own law that your government put in place.
We're expecting to hear the Foreign Secretary's plan for the post-Brexit trade deal in Northern Ireland.
We've had the words. We now need to see the action.
And does my guest, Laurence Fox, think Boris Johnson was right when he said this?
There's nothing wrong being woke.
Let's start with this story, headlined in The Times. Britain's work from home while Europe goes back to the office. It's underlined by the figures in this graph, which we can show you too. It shows how the number of journeys to places of work compares to pre-pandemic levels. It shows the UK journeys to work are down 22%. Let's take Spain and France by comparison. They are down by only 9%. So my question to start the show and start with you, Siobhan. Is it a good or a bad thing that more Britons are working from home?
I've got really mixed views on this because flexibility is excellent, particularly for people with childcare or caring responsibility. I think we proved in the pandemic that it can work for some sectors, but I do think it needs to be job by job, sector by sector. And there was a lot of people had horrible experiences of working at home if they don't have a garden, if they're young. You know, you learn so much from being around people. And to be perfectly honest, I'm completely zoomed out on a personal level. And my little one was running around like she was mad as a box of frogs this morning, so I like to go to work. And I think in Parliament we needed to be face-to-face to get things done. And I think two other things. The first is that we do need to be competitive with the rest of the world. The pandemic has created a situation where the whole world is pressing go at the same time. And secondly, I do have a real niggling worry that if companies can have people, you know, if a company in my constituency in Gloucestershire can have people that are actually up in Edinburgh working, why can they not be in India or other countries? You know, are we going to create problems, unintended consequences down the line if we don't get people back to face-to-face for at least some of the week?
Jenny, where are you? Is it a good or a bad thing that Britons seem to be working from home more than other comparable countries?
Well, I think the government's just picking a fight on this. I don't know when the Tory government got so dictatorial with businesses about what their workers ought to do. Surely they are best placed to judge whether it suits their business to be in the office, at home, a mix of the two. I think the flexibility is quite welcome for a lot of people. I mean, personally, like Siobhan, I don't care if I never do another Zoom meeting again. I'm thoroughly fed up with it, and I don't think Parliament functioned particularly well.
Do you think it's the same for the civil service? Do you think they should be back?
I think it depends what you're doing, and I think it depends where you live. I think it depends what your responsibilities are and how important it is. You can't have a one-size-fits-all for this. I think the government's just trying to say something to distract from what people are really concerned about, which obviously is the cost of living crisis.
I'll come back to you in just a moment, Siobhan, then on picking a fight. Laurence, where are you? Is it a good or a bad thing?
I think that human beings are social animals, and it's good that we see each other face to face. And, you know, we mustn't forget that the lockdown, what wasn't working from home for most people. It was the working classes, and the service industry never stopped working outside of home. So I think what's most important is that human beings see each other face to face and you're more productive.
Good or a bad thing, Ellie, in terms of where Britain is on the list of people going back to work?
I think there's a whole range of things that happened in the pandemic that sort of accelerated changes that were already happening in society. And I think working from home is one of those. And I think instead of some government ministers have reacted by criticising the workforce, and instead I think they should be thinking, how can we get the best out of this? But let's remember that actually millions of people in this country did go to work. In fact, we found at class that 6 in 10 young people said that they were made to go to work when they felt uncomfortable to do so. And people actually died from COVID because they were forced to go to work. And so I think what we need to do now is, yes, make life better for people who are working from home and make that work as well as it can, but also to protect those who can't work from home. And that means doing things like introducing a proper rate of sick pay that people can actually live on, and investing in our health service so that if people get ill, they can go to the doctor and be seen quickly and treated, and it doesn't have long-term consequences.
I mean, just to be clear, I said going back to work, and I do mean going back to a workplace, to the office, because, of course, lots of people are, as we've discussed, working from home. I mean, you've heard the discussion here, Siobhan, picking a fight. The government's picking a fight, according to Jenny, and the government shouldn't be directing people or companies back to work. Do you agree with that? I mean, even Nadine Dorries, the Cabinet Minister, said that actually we should be measuring productivity.
Well, I think productivity has been a problem for this country for a long time, even pre-pandemic, so that absolutely should be a focus, and it is for lots. There is a distinction between the public sector and the private sector. Oh. You're absolutely right that many jobs cannot have the choice and don't have the luxury of choice working at home. But it's interesting that Jenny jumped straight to a sort of criticism of the government when this story was about looking across the rest of the world and looking at other countries. Ultimately, the government, in terms of the civil service, is right to look at efficiencies. The taxpayers across this country want this government to function really, really well. And if certain departments are not functioning well enough with so much working from home, then I think it's right that everybody should be making changes now.
Jenny, do you want to respond?
It's not me that started this. You know, the government ministers have come out and said big proclamations on what they think people ought to be doing. And I think they are picking a fight. I think they are seeing this as a distraction because they know that it will take up column inches and time on programmes like this, when actually it's...
Well spent, Jenny, very well spent.
I mean, it's fascinating, Jo, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think it's the number one issue that's challenging people up and down the country today.
Well, listen, I've made my case. I think there's a real mix options. Companies are making decisions. Businesses need to thrive. They're going to need to have people face-to-face in certain sectors, and I think that's important.
All right, we are going
let them choose.
All right, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about Andrew Bailey's remarks yesterday. He's the Bank of England governor. He was in front of the Treasury Select Committee of MPs. Let's take a listen.
I'm afraid the one that I am going to sound, I guess, rather apocalyptic about is food. You know, as you know, Ukraine is a major supplier of wheat, major supplier of oil, cooking oils. And that is a major worry. And it's not just, I have to tell you, a major worry for this country, it is a major worry for the developing world as well. It's a very, very difficult place for us to be in. I mean, to predict and to forecast 10% inflation and then say, as we were saying a few minutes ago, and there's not a lot we can do about 80% of it, is, I can tell you, it is an extremely difficult place to be. I mean, we have to recognise the reality of the situation that we face.
What was your response, Siobhan, briefly to those comments? Were you surprised? Were they helpful?
I was surprised by the language used. I mean, it's not rocket science to understand that given in the global inflationary pressures and the global issues that we have at the moment, things like grain, oil and gas, freight costs are going up. They're going to feed into the cost of food. But I was listening to the chairman of Marks and Spencer's this morning. He said it wasn't an apocalyptic situation for his customers, but there will be cost passed on. And in Stroud and people that are coming to me, I'm just going to be really honest about this. This is a long-term issue that has got no quick fixes, and I think the public understand when they look around the world and they see the Ukrainian conflict and they see that we're trying to all come out of the pandemic, that there are a number of pressures.
Do you think Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England governor, they're trying to abdicate some responsibility for what has happened? He's talking about the external shocks. As he quoted, 80% of that rise is down to things like war in Ukraine that he couldn't predict. On the other hand, he has a target of 2% when it comes to inflation. Has he failed?
I mean, what I took from that, given some of the things that Andrew Bailey has said recently that have got a lot of attention, that actually, you know, welcome to what everyone has known for quite a long time. You know, there is a huge pressure on families up and down the country. 1 in 20 households don't have enough money to pay for their food and their energy after housing costs. This is serious. It's not being called a crisis for nothing. The Governor of the Bank of England is recognising it and calling MPs' attention to this. What we need now is to know what the government's going to do about this. And so far, it's been precious little, and they've actually tried to minimise the problem and come up with things about learning to cook and shop cheaper and get a better job.
Well.
And I think that, you know, obviously that's completely inadequate. The ideas the Labour Party is putting forward won't solve everything, and I know you're going to challenge me back on that, but actually they would help. Putting £600 in the pocket of a harder, you know,
all right, well, this is the windfall tax on oil and gas companies that you've proposed, and we'll come on to that in a minute. Do you want to just respond very briefly, because I want to bring the others in, of course, on one of these policy ideas by the government?
The government has just put 400 billion quid into supporting the livelihoods and jobs with a 22 billion pound package. 9 billion of that was about energy costs, and the Labour Party says that that isn't enough and doesn't really scratch the surface. Yet their windfall tax only raises between 1.2 billion and 1.9 billion. You know, ultimately, this is a government that cares deeply about this and is trying to find. But there are actually the Bank of England governor, who is independent. There are very limited levers to pull, and the government is.
And there is a discussion about whether he should have raised interest rates earlier. But we're going to move on and talk about one of the things that Jenny mentioned. This is a piece in the Times. Obesity U-turn is weak, shallow, and immoral. The threat of letters of no confidence has seen off a policy that might have turned around Britain's relentlessly bad diet. Now, this has been written by former Conservative leader William Hague, and it's in response to the government's announcement that it's actually going to postpone or certainly delay the government's plan to ban buy one, get one free deals for food and drinks high in fat, salt and sugar. And they're also going to delay or put off their plans to restrict TV advertising of junk food before the 9 p.m. watershed. Are you happy with this U-turn by the government, which says it's about cost of living?
Well, first of all, let's not forget that the main reason we're in this situation is because our government printed £1 billion of money from the magic money tree
on the
every
quantitative
day
easing
for 2 years. So that's going to cause an inflationary crisis. We've got a cost of living crisis going on. I don't think taxing the poorest in society is the solution to that. I think what Lee Anderson has done in his constituency, which is to empower people, to empower people to budget responsibly, to cook for themselves, and you know, give a man a fish and you can eat for a day, teach a man to fish, and you feed him for life.
And on the ban?
I don't think it's up to the government. I don't think the government should be getting involved in this stuff. It's not their business. Let businesses act how businesses want to act.
Right. So you weren't in favour of the ban in the first place. And what about the U-turn then on it?
I don't want to be told by government ministers what I can and can't eat. Thanks very much.
Ellie?
I mean, there are millions of people in this country who'll be watching this show right now that know that
millions.
There's no...
Lovely.
There's no... Well, let's hope. But there are millions of people in this country who, whether they're watching this show or not, know that there's no more budgeting that they can do, that actually what we need now is government intervention. And they know, because they're looking at their bills, that the government is not doing enough. And there are things that the government could do. For example, it could cancel the cut to universal credit, which people have time and time again begged the government to do, and it is refusing to do. And what's the consequence of that? The consequence is we have a charity like Action for Children that is saying that children are going to school with chilblains because their houses are so cold, and this is in one of the richest countries in the world. And let me just remind you that actually, while this is happening to ordinary families in this country, British Gas reported a 54% increase in profits. So some of us are having a cost of living scandal, but some of us are having a cost of living bonanza, and it's time that the government intervene to redress the balance and put food on the table of ordinary people.
Is there no more budgeting? Do you accept what Ellie May has said, that there is no more budgeting that families can do, Lawrence, in order to cut their household bills? That everyone is being pushed to the wire, people who are on low incomes?
There's lots that can be done to ease household bills. We could get rid of green subsidies, scrap net zero, start fracking. You know, there's millions of things we can do to help the people of this country. The future is right beneath their own feet. But for some reason, we have everyone wants something from the state. No, it should be you should take responsibility for yourself. We could be energy self-sufficient, and we could we could really abate the cost of living crisis by taking people's energy bills down and doing what Lee Anderson's done, which is teach people to feed themselves responsibly.
Jenny?
I find this very difficult, coming from the town I come from and seeing around me what I see and the people that I speak to. The idea that their local MP can go and say, do you know what, you're just not shopping savvy.
If it came from a Labour MP, everyone would have been applauding, but because it was a Conservative MP, everyone shouted him down.
No, I'm not shouting him down because he's a Tory. I'm shouting him down because he's talking absolute nonsense, being polite. What's going on here is there's an opportunity for the government, which I think they are starting to be tempted by, to impose a windfall tax on companies that, through no genius of their own, have made massive profits and put that money into the pockets of these households that are unable to pay their bills. And on your initial point about obesity, the idea that advertising junk food to my kids is in any way got anything to do with cost of living is just laughable. The reason the government's backed off from this is because it isn't committed to doing the long-term actions that are needed to solve an obesity crisis. And the reason I feel so strongly about this is because both my parents died. My mother died very recently, last month, at 71. My dad died at 48, quite some time ago. And that happened because of lifestyle, because they were brought up on poor diets. They had, you know, they made poor choices through their lives because they didn't have the kind of government intervention that is needed in partnership with communities and parents. No, let me finish this.
Sure.
In partnership with parents and communities to get a healthy lifestyle, to be able to make the choices that need to be made. And we're going to be paying for this. We're all going to be paying for this through our taxes because people dying young and getting sick young is incredibly expensive. And if the government thinks it can sit back and let this happen, it's in for a massive shock.
Lawrence?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that your parents died from lifestyle choices. Fortunately, we are sovereign individuals and we can make our own choices, and people do that regardless, whatever happens.
But not when you're 5. When you're a young child.
Okay, but my mother ate meat once a week when she was young. She grew up very poor. We are the healthiest that we've ever really been.
We're not.
Yes,
Well, not on obesity. I mean, the figures show that we are the fattest in Europe.
Female life expectancy in the northeast.
It's not the government's job to get involved with obesity.
All right, well, let's talk about the government's job.
Taxes.
Well, all right, well, we'll come on to the windfall tax in just a moment. But hang on, I need to ask you.
Otherwise, what's the point in having
said
it?
the government
Right, well, let me come back to Siobhan then on this.
No.
I mean, are they right? Is Jenny right that actually it is the government's job to get involved on this issue? The government said it was going to get involved on this issue. William Hague, former Conservative leader, is saying it's a dereliction of duty. Who are you with?
I'm intuitively against state interference with families and with choices. I think with obesity, though, we have had decades of problematic choices, and people are really stuck. And the problems for children is horrendous. Problems for the NHS is horrendous. What I'm very worried about this cutting off the change for the buy one get one free, not least because if the argument is about cost of living, my understanding from some of the research, I was speaking to my friend Dr. Dolly Tice, who's looked at this very closely, is actually having those in your basket can often raise the costs of your bills by about 20 odd percent. So actually let's look at the facts and let's look at the details. Education is always the best route for helping people make good choices, but state interference, I completely understand the concerns about that.
I mean, a 2015 Public Health England report, which first proposed a ban like this, admitted there is also evidence that during the high inflationary period of 2008 to 10, promotions were a useful coping strategy for shoppers to manage the worst effects of food and drink inflation. What do you say to that? It could help with the cost of living.
Well, listen, what the government is doing at the moment is looking at a range of options, like asked all departments, all government ministers to think very, very carefully about how we can ease cost of living pressures. And that's right, that's a top issue for all of my constituents in Stroud. It's a top issue around the country. So let's look at all the different options. But I think with this, I can understand why the campaigners who work so hard to make those legal changes are frustrated, because unfortunately I'm not convinced that the evidence backs up what
I think I
aim.
would support what Siobhan said if this was just about the promotions and the cost of food. I totally understand that, but it isn't. And we've got a situation where there are people in their 30s getting diabetes because of the dietary choices they're making, and they're making them because they are being relentlessly marketed to, and they're being marketed to.
Blame the government for that.
I do blame the government.
Absolutely.
No, I do blame the government for that, because the government sets the legal framework around what is and isn't allowed, and you are allowed to market these substances to young children, and they do that not because children are sort of passive recipients, but they know that it works. That's why they do it.
But we've got to move away from the fact the state can fix all and everything is the government's fault.
You're just telling everyone to stop working from home, but you can't get involved in what our kids eat.
I didn't actually say that, Jenny. I think you know that. But ultimately, the state fixing everything is just not, and it's not. Individual choice has to be really good. But if you look at the evidence, let's have to look at the evidence of these policies and see. And if it's about cost of living, I would urge let's go back. And I think particularly on the bog-off offers.
All right. Well, you've all mentioned in one way or another, or some of you have, about the windfall tax that has been proposed to help with the cost of living and people's rising energy bills. If I just show you this on the front page of the Mirror, the headline is, "For once, just do the right thing." Now, this is because the Labour Party is hoping to hold an amendment, or have an amendment, I should say, on the government's Queen speech, which is their legislative agenda. Now, regardless of whether this is a good idea or not, a windfall tax...
It's a very good idea.
But regardless of that, no Tory MP is going to vote for this amendment, are they?
This is about putting pressure. It's about raising the issue, about explaining the policy, getting it airtime, as we are doing. Whether or not Tories want to go and vote for it is really a matter for them. I would encourage them to put their constituents, who are really hard-pressed at the moment, at the front of their minds and support it. But regardless of what happens in the vote today, this issue isn't going to go away. This is a good idea. It's a sensible policy. From what I can understand from reading the Sunday papers, there is some support growing for it within the Cabinet. Let's see. Oh, within the Cabinet. Well, I mean, it's certainly true that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, have left it on the table. They're not taking it off the table. Are you worried, Siobhan, that there will be a U-turn on this, or are you going to sit here and say that a windfall tax is a very bad idea?
I will wait to see what's coming into measure. I find it easier to vote against government than vote with some of the mad Labour motions that we see go down.
Is this a mad idea?
Ultimately, it's jazzy, lovely politics that suggests that, similar to the state can fix all, that big corporates can pay for everything. It sounds great. It's straight out of the Corbyn playbook. But ultimately, anything where you are going to tax, particularly on an ad hoc tax with big business, it's going to come out in prices. It will probably raise prices down the line. It doesn't solve the original issue. And we've got to be very, very cautious at the moment about thinking or sending a message that these one-off kind of great political, sort of ideological approaches are going to fix this issue. They are not. And the big businesses, we need to... I think...
But would it help people now?
I'm not convinced it was. If on the numbers
that... You don't think £600 would help?
What, you're suggesting £600 for every single person in the UK?
We're suggesting £600 for the worst-off households in the UK. And I'm telling you now... I mean, you may not have had to go around a supermarket ever.
And £200.
What do you mean? No. Let me finish.
Is that because I'm a Conservative?
No, what I was going to say was...
I've never been to a supermarket before in my life.
If I could get to the end of the sentence. What I was going to say was, if you are someone who's been around a supermarket, adding things up as they put them in the basket, getting £600 extra to be able to spend on feeding your family across the year makes a difference.
Where do you draw the line, though? Why not a windfall tax on Big Pharma?
Why not?
No, why not?
That was a flippant response.
I was going to say, are you taxing other companies?
Why not a windfall tax on Big Pharma? Why not a windfall tax on Tesco's themselves, who make astronomical profits?
This is the SNP's
Why not a windfall tax on everybody? Where do you stop? You've got, at some point, we have to sit there and go, right, these things are a bit, they're not the right way.
The reason I'm so certain of this is that these companies have made this money through chance because of what's been happening on global markets. It's not because of their investment decisions, their brilliance, their talent, their skill, their ingenuity. That is not what's led to these record profits. And it's about just putting a little bit of what they've made back into the pockets of their customers. That's all we're trying to do.
In favour of a windfall tax on oil and gas companies on their profits and about extending it more in the way that Lawrence has just been setting out, not supporting but proposing?
I am in favour of a windfall tax because I think that people need help right now, and that's what it will do. But I worry about it as well because in 1997, New Labour actually did introduce a windfall tax on oil and gas companies to fund apprenticeships. And that was very helpful, but ultimately the reason that they did that is to avoid the question of who owns the energy companies. And now we're in a position, all that time later, where what we're seeing are massive rises in people's bills and companies like Shell reporting record profits. So I think what we need to do now, which is a very popular policy, is bring the energy companies back into public ownerships so that any profit that is made is reinvested back into the energy company to keep people's bills low and to make sure that we are energy efficient. And this means that we can guard against something like this happening in the future. My concern with the windfall tax is it doesn't stop this happening again in the future, but I am in favour of it because it will help people.
Wouldn't they just invest somewhere else, though? If you said to an energy company, oh, sorry, mate, we're just going to have one of that, wouldn't the energy company just go, I'm going to go somewhere else? Wouldn't we be better just turning around as a country and saying, all of the energy we need and to fill in the gap between renewables starting to work and the fact that we're importing gas from people we're at war with is right beneath our feet?
So as to your first point, there's lots of examples around the world, like even in certain US states where utilities like energy and water have come back into public ownership, and that has worked very well. So we haven't seen what you're describing happen in the real life examples of
fuel prices in America have doubled. Once Biden cut off the pipelines.
But what I'm talking about happened about 10 years ago, so it's not related to the current fuel crisis.
All right.
And let me just answer the other question, sorry.
What was the other question?
I actually forgotten.
Yeah.
What was the other question?
How are you going to answer the other question?
Basically,
about having other companies taxed, sorry. About extending it beyond oil and gas companies, a windfall tax on, yes, Tesco's or...
I think most people can see at the moment that there is a serious imbalance in our economic system. We have millions of families who can't afford the basics while you have companies across the economy posting record profits. And actually, what we need is a rebalancing to make sure that...
Stealing or rebalancing, it just seems to me like you're just stealing it. You've made some money, I want some of your money, I'm going to steal it off you for no reason. That's not rebalancing, that's just theft.
Most people can see that what is important is that we create a society in which all of us play a part, that we build roads, that we create hospitals, that we educate children. And that requires all of us putting a little bit into society, whether that's by caring for others or, if you can afford it, by paying a lot of tax. And I think that's a fair thing to ask, and I think that's what lots of companies in this country should be doing.
We're hoping to hear from Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, on the Northern Ireland Protocol. She hasn't actually, I don't think, stood up in the Commons as yet. So we're going to talk about culture wars, because we often hear words on this programme and elsewhere, like culture wars and woke. But what does the public actually make of these terms? Bobby Duffy, who's a Professor of Public Policy at King's College London, has been researching this area specifically and joins us now. Bobby, are people familiar with these terms and with culture wars?
Increasingly so is the upshot. So the UK public increasingly feel the country is divided by culture wars. 54% now agree that's the case, up from 46% in 2020 in this joint study with Ipsos that we did, and big increases in awareness of the terms like woke and particularly cancel culture. That has shot up in people's awareness. We've seen a halving of people who said they'd never heard of it, and now 2/3 of people think they know at least a little about it. And that kind of reflects an exponential increase in the use of those terms in the media, where actually prior to 2018, UK newspapers didn't use the term cancel culture at all. But by 2021, there were 3,670 articles that used that as a term.
OK, what do people make of the terms like culture wars, Bobby?
It's really interesting because it's still a bit of a vague term. Things like culture wars are still a bit of a vague term for people. So when we asked in 2020 what the types of issues you associate with culture wars, the most common answer was, I don't know. I have no idea what the actual term means. But then the top answers that people did give were things like race, immigration, and religion. Way down the list were things like statues and cancelling talks from people. That is not top of people's mind. It's one of those big picture cultural differences between people. Thanks very much. Bobby Lawrence, what do you understand by the term culture wars?
Culture wars and wokeism more generally. There's obviously cancel culture, of which I'm a product. I used to sit on a film set all day, get paid loads of money to pretend to be someone else, and now I have to lead a political party, which I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. We're teaching children to be racists. It's a modern religion of absolute racism. It's the most divisive, disgusting, secular religion that has ever inhabited.
Hang on, you've lost me. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about what a culture war is.
I see. What a
culture war is which was started on the left through all the things like cancel culture and.
Well, of course, that is hugely debatable and disputed, as we will talk about in an issue. But all right, I sort of get the vague thrust of what you think culture wars actually means. You've got a new report out, which I read last night, which says we're not in the midst of a culture war. Why?
Well, actually, it's not that straightforward. So the report is called the UK Race Class Narratives Report. Very wordy, but also a great report, which I can say because I didn't write it. So I can tell you it's amazing and you should read it.
Yes, all right. But now just tell me what it says.
Well, I'm just doing my job. And what we found is that there is a narrative that is being created by the people at the top. So we found this by analysing hundreds and hundreds of documents across the media, across social media, across newspapers, across politics. And we found that there is this story being told by a handful of people at the top that we are divided and that our biggest enemy is essentially this group called the woke brigade or the woke mob. And what we found actually is when you talk to ordinary people, which we talked to thousands of ordinary people as part of this project. We did a big survey and we did focus groups and interviews. And what we found is that actually people generally, they want to respect their neighbours, they actually respect one another's differences, they want to act with compassion. And what they really care about are issues like paying their bills, like feeling secure, like what's going on in their communities. But what Professor Duffy was saying there is right, which is that actually this story that is being used to kind of try and divide people is becoming more popular. Or it's becoming more prevalent, as this very conversation shows. And what our report has done is it's found new ways of talking about our society and talking about our country that can bring people together around their shared material interests, around the things that most of us cared about. And when we tested these news stories against this divisive story that we're talking about today, we found that actually the news story does work better in testing. And I think that shows that most people are exhausted by division and they want connection. And I think that is what we can build together.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. This is as I've said on Question Time, Britain is the warmest, most welcoming and tolerant and wonderful country that we're lucky to live in. But the implementation of all of this, of gender theory, of critical race theory in our schools and institutions is appalling. And actually...
Why is it appalling?
Because children are not racists. And you don't teach a child, and you certainly don't say to the most disadvantaged and underprivileged portion of society, which happen to be young, white, working class people, that they are in some way privileged. And that's what wokery and class wars and culture wars are all about. It's all about division. It has nothing to do with unity. We're a progressive, wonderful, open, warm and welcoming society.
Ellie?
So what we would say, if you look at this report that we've done, what we would say when we hear something like that is actually what's happening here is that the lens is being refocused away from the people who have the power in society. That is, the people who own the media, it's the people in the government. These are the people that have this power in society and they can decide on how we all live and work. They can decide whether we have money in our pockets or whether we don't, and that's what we've just been talking about. And I think what this story does that Lawrence was just repeating there, is it takes the lens away from those people and it redirects it towards people who believe in racial justice, and it tells people, no, these people are the enemy. They're the people that you should be scared of. And you can understand why people in power like this story, because it actually causes division between people rather than leaving the lens on them.
This
the
country
real people.
leads the world in what's so-called racial justice. We lead the world in it. Well, that's just factual. Why?
Well, you say it was just factual. What are your examples?
Well, there've been studies about Ipsos have done studies on this about how tolerant British people are in terms of things like intermarrying with people of different skin colours and stuff like that. I think we came behind Canada and New Zealand. We're incredibly warm and welcoming, and this idea of teaching children. I mean, I had this morning, I've been sent a recording of a child being berated by a teacher for misgendering another child in school and stuff like this, and you're just going, this is madness. And you've got it across police forces, you've got it across the education system and the health service. And actually we're starting up a project called the Bad Law Project, which is non-political, so it aims to cover all areas of the political spectrum, where we can depoliticise our institutions. Because what this wokery and this cultural stuff is, it attempts to undermine our wonderful and brilliant culture from within. It's divisive, not inclusive.
But I think what I'm saying is that it also provides, it's a useful thing for people at the very top to repeat, because it provides a distraction away from the issues that matter. No, well, I mean, in a way, you're here. In a way, so then you are, in a way, at the top because you're here. You've got a platform right now, which most people in this country...
Top then as well, are you?
Well, I do think that I've got a privileged platform that most people don't have, yes. But can I finish my point?
Sure.
So I think what we can see in the media is that it's very possible for people to repeat the stories of the powerful. Even if they're not part of the government, it's possible for people to repeat the stories of the government if they share the same values of the government. And I think what we can see at the moment is that is happening. Most people watching this, they don't need me to tell them. They know that actually these issues that you're describing don't really play a big part in their lives. But things like getting a doctor's appointment on time, putting food on the table, these things really matter to people. And I say this because we did the research. We went out there and spoke to people, and they didn't bring any of this stuff up spontaneously. They talked about getting on with their lives in their communities.
Let me just go to Bobby, because there is a question. You will have listened to the debate here between Lawrence and Ellie, the discussion. I mean, is this a new thing? Or have we just got new terms for a phenomenon that has been around for a very long time? Just different words we use. We used to talk about political correctness, for example. I mean, is this new?
I think it is. In some senses, we always have discussions about and heated discussions about culture change, and that's perfectly legitimate. That is an important part of political discussion. I think what's changed a bit, though, is how we do it, and that's why we did this report. Our research on this is how we have that discussion is really important, as well as the discussion itself. And it's become very heated, and it's become a discussion where you only get to hear from the two extreme sides of the debate, when, just as people are saying, the vast majority of the public are much more nuanced, and in the middle of that, the speed and scale of our adoption of that kind of culture war rhetoric from the US is a risky game. Culture wars are not about disagreement about cultural issues. It's about whether you're in one tribe or another tribe, where you can't see compromise or connect with people on the other side. And that's where it's worrying. And that's why we're trying to highlight we need a different sort of debate about this, not to hide from cultural issues, but to do it in a more balanced and less heated way.
All right, well, we'll come to that issue of hiding from it. But, Bobby, thank you very much for joining us. Siobhan, listening to what Lawrence and Ellie have said about this, do you think that politicians and political parties are stoking this, or that it is being used, weaponised in a way to try and reinforce certain beliefs, which tribe you might belong to?
I think some of it needs to be taken down. I mean, Twitter is permanently outraged, and most of this stuff is on Twitter and social media and going round and round. But actually, my experience locally, we've got a Labour-led council that's trying to remove a statue called the Black Boy Clock, and they're trying to potentially, people in Dursley tell me, change a street name called Black Boys. When I pointed out in the local press that we should be putting plaques fix up and not removing history, leaving the statue where it is. It's been there for 250 years, by the way. So, and no other MP has raised this before. So it's not something that's come up. I was called a racist. Local people that took that position about leaving statues in place was called a racist. And actually, people are quite exercised. But the silent majority don't want to wade into this on social media. They're completely put off by it. But this council wants to spend £65,000 removing a statue at a point where we've got real cost of living pressures. I don't think it's a priority. People are interested in common sense approaches and not hiding away history. So I think it's really interesting to hear from Professor Duffy. I think Professor Matthew Goodwin's very good on this as well, looking at the sort of the more academic side of things. But leave things where they are and let's learn as we go through.
Well, Jenny,
stop the drama.
I mean, Labour MPs sat in your seat there often say culture wars don't exist, that they don't want to talk about them or engage in some of these issues because they are difficult, many of them, to talk about. The trans rights issue is one of them. But they are important, aren't they, in terms of guiding either public policy in some instances, or they are important because people do want to talk about what it means?
I wouldn't say they're not important, and I've been on here before talking about trans rights issues, so I'm not afraid to engage with these discussions. But what I would say is similar to the points that Ellie was making about her report, is that these are just not the priority issues that the Labour MP who's coming on this programme wants to discuss, because we know there are very real, immediate concerns that are affecting daily life that people are far, far more worried about. So there's an issue in Dursley about a statue. Well, let's hope that they can, or Stroud, sorry.
Stroud, yeah.
But, those
Bristol,
things, there isn't
all
one in
over the
Darlington.
country they want to
There isn't one in Darlington. We're very proud of our statues. But, those things should be debated, and that's OK to be able to have a discussion and for local people to decide together through democratic processes what should happen. Nobody needs to have a culture war about it. And sometimes I think that but I think some people are saying, oh, look, this is a culture war issue, actually raises the temperature when these things can almost always be resolved through people just talking to one another.
Right, I mean, you've launched a party, as you said, you're a leader of Reclaim Party, based on being an anti-woke collective. But, I mean, there's no evidence that anyone thinks that you represent them with that agenda. You have one town councillor and have lost your deposit every time you've stood as a candidate. You haven't been the only one to lose a deposit in the London mayoral election, the Scottish parliamentary election, North Shropshire by-election. So is Jenny right that actually it isn't there, this issue, in terms of people wanting to see you as their representative on an anti-woke collective?
I'm not here to be their representative. I'm here to be the canary in the coal mine. I'm telling you what's coming, and you just have to take one look at America and you'll see what's coming, where parents are overtaking their school boards because they've seen their children taught this terrible rampant trans ideology.
Hang on, sorry.
And we are 2 years down the line. Yesterday we had black bloc-dressed Antifa fascists stopping women holding a meeting at the statue of Emmeline Pankhurst. That's what you got, and violently shoving them out of the way. What is coming is what's happened in America, which was billions of dollars of burnt-out streets as this movement tries to destroy history.
You're making it worse by
pointing it out.
No.
So we'll just pretend it doesn't exist.
No. What I'm saying,
it's not real.
My children have just finished their comprehensive school education in Darlington. I do not recognise the characterisation of state education in this country that you're trying to persuade people is taking place.
What happened in Bristol?
I think I've got two nieces at school in Bristol, actually, and they're getting a very good education.
Did the statue fall over by itself and walk down the road to the river?
You are extrapolating from a very small number of events and saying they're happening in every community up and down the country, and I can promise you, Lawrence, they're just not.
All right, I've said we would get Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, in on the Northern Ireland Protocol and the government's plans for it. She has spoken in the House of Commons. Let's have a listen.
So much of the progress that we have seen in Northern Ireland rests on this agreement. And for the agreement to continue to operate successfully, all three strands must function successfully. These are the arrangements, are the foundation on which the modern, thriving Northern Ireland is built. It commands the support of parties across this House. and we will continue to work with all communities in Northern Ireland to protect it.
All right, well, that was obviously a fairly early on opening gambit from the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss there. We will bring you more in terms of exactly what the government is proposing to change in what we now know as the Northern Ireland Protocol tomorrow. I will be back, of course, tomorrow with Prime Minister's questions, the first one since we've been back at 11:15. Thank you to all of my guests for today. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.